we're going to be having a series of workshops like this one, where we'll go through the theory, have some activities in between, but we will also have one-on-one consultations where you can now bring to me your assignment and you can say, Queen, I need help with my grammar, and we'll go through it, identify some few mistakes. So what is important to note is that I do not fix the mistakes for you, but I equip you with skills to be able to do so yourself. So I will identify a few mistakes, then you will have the responsibility to fix the rest of the documents. If you're not understanding an assignment, you can book for a one-on-one session with me and say, Queen, I'm not understanding this. How should I approach this? Then we're going to go through your assignments and give you guidance, brainstorm, and see how you can structure your work or what the assignment requires of you. If it's a content-specific challenge that you're facing, then it's important that you speak to your tutor. Your tutor will be the one to help you with the content of your work, or your lecturer. So we just help, or I just help with the academic writing aspects. So referencing, how to structure your work, understanding the question, and so on. So after today's workshop also, let's assume you have a question or you have a paper that you need to see if you're able to understand what we did in the workshop. You can book for a one-on-one consultation. And the one-on-one consultation will be booked in this way. So if you want to book to see me on a one-on-one, the sessions are 30 minutes long. It's between me and the student, and Mr. Kagiso will be in the session. So you have to send an email to Mr. Kagiso. He will then check both of our schedule and book for a session where we can meet, just myself and the student and Mr. Kagiso, to look at your specific assignment. Okay, so this is a more generic method, but we also have one-on-one or individualized session. Now, the presentation will be sent to you at the end of the session if you need. I will give you my email at the end of the session. For those who attend the session fully, you can, at the end, send me an email and say, Queen, may you please forward me today's presentation on grammar and language, and I will forward it to you. If you want to book for a session, please send an email to Mr. Kagiso and not me. So to Queen, the presentation. For a consultation, Mr. Kagiso. Today, as you can see, we're going to be looking at grammar and language. So the session will be divided into two. When we're done with the grammar, we're going to have a 5 or 10 minutes break, after which we're now going to look at the language. So we're going to look at what grammar is, what language is. We'll quickly look at the difference between the American and the British English. Then we're going to dive straight into punctuation, which is a very huge and important aspect of grammar. How do you punctuate? The use of a comma, semicolons, and so on. Then we're going to look at sentence structure. So how should you structure your sentences? Then we'll look at capitalization, articles, then we'll move into the grammar. Now, what I need you to pay attention is this. When it comes to grammar, grammar has so many rules. And sometimes it's difficult to really, it's not about just let me understand this rule. It's a lot more practical. So what I would suggest is don't try to cram or, understand all the rules. What is important is to be able to identify mistakes. So what I have done is over the years, I have looked at the common errors that students usually make. And when I'm presenting, I'll say, for example, students usually make this mistake. When I say that, that means this is something important you should note, because it's something that is recurrent in students' work. So you pay attention to that. But also as a student, you know what kind of mistakes or what kind of punctuation you struggle with the most. So when I get there, you pay more attention to what you struggle with the most and how to identify the mistakes when it comes to that specific grammatical rule. All right, so let's dive straight in. So when we talk about grammar, we're referring to mostly, what we say the syntax, which is the sentence structure, and the morphology, which is how words come together, right? So that means we're looking at your sentence structure, punctuation, briefly. And then when we talk about language in academic writing, we're looking at two main things. The tone. Is the student formal? How does the student write? Do the student write as they speak, or do they write in a formal way? The way the student write, is it clear enough for me to understand what they're saying? So is their language simple, clear, And that is what we look for when we look at student language in academic writing. So you will see there's definitions there. That is for you to go through it. But as academics, when we look at academic writing, that is what we look for. Your tone, right? Are you formal? Is your language clear? Is it simple to understand? Okay. How is your sentence structure? Do you have any punctuation errors? Am I able to get the message in your sentence? Right? So there's two types of English that really govern, two main standards in English is the British and the American. Every other variation, what we call variations of English, fall under these two. For example, the Australian English falls under the British. The South African English falls under the British, right? Then we have others that fall under the American. And I'm going to focus on South African English, of course, because we're in South Africa. So what does this mean for us? It means most institutions in South Africa use the British English. The reason I'm highlighting these two is because they're both correct, but you should not switch between the two. Now, you see sometimes students make the mistake to switch between the British and the American English. That is, in terms of spelling, you will see in some places the student will write color with C-O-L-O-U-R. And then in some instances, they'll write behavior without the U, right? So what we are saying is, if you start with the British English, be consistent. If you start with the American English, be consistent. But mostly UNISA uses the British English, which is the South African variation. So what does that mean in terms of spelling? That the OEAE words like anemia, diarrhea, encyclopedia will come with the AE. Why you see the British is just encyclopedia with E. I'm sure you've seen both spellings. It's not that one is right and the other is wrong. These are just two main standards in English. You will see, for example, if you come down with the ELL word, like cancel, driller, marvelous, you will see cancelled with the British is double L, and with the American is one L. Now, if you note, when you're writing your assignment using Word, right, you will see that sometimes it underlines a word. You write a word like capitalization with Z, and you would underline it. Why? Because your language is turned or switched to the British. That means the Z is American. So it's going to underline it because it's not recognizing the Z, because your computer is switched to the American or British English. So when you start writing your assignment, first ensure that your language is the one that you want to use. So you will see here, for example, at the bottom, if you check at the bottom of my presentation here, it says English United Kingdom. So you can change that to English South Africa, or you can change that to leave it to English United Kingdom because South Africa falls under United Kingdom. If it's English American, then it's going to automatically switch to American, and all British words or variations of the words will be underlined. Okay. In terms of vocabulary, also, you see that the British English, for example, says trousers, American says pants. And I was once asked the question, Queen, we follow the British, why do we use American words? That is why in academics, there's the spoken and the written. You can speak however you want. You know, British, American, they're both correct, and you can interswitch with all do. But when you're writing, try to stick to one standard or one variation and stick to it, right? So you want to write British English or South African English, which is the same, right? It falls under the British. So me really bringing this was just to highlight that to you so that you understand that there's two main variations and which one falls or UNISA uses, which is the British. Okay, so it's not really for you to note all the differences between the two, but is to stick to one and follow that specific one. Any questions regarding the American versus the British English? All right, so there's no questions. Now let's dive into grammar. Okay, so we're just having a look to see the difference between the two and why it's important to note the difference between the two. All right, we're going to begin with the comma, my most favorite punctuation mark. Why is it so? The comma is the most highly used punctuation mark. And what is also important with the comma is that it is also the punctuation mark that is used the most wrongly, right? So you will find the most errors in students' work with the comma because it's so easy to use. It can also be very difficult to use. So we just tend to want to put a comma everywhere, which makes what we call comma splices, which we'll look at. So let's look at the ways in which we use the comma. Number one, after introductory phrases. So a pause. So after an introductory phase, you usually need a comma. So for example, comma, the students attended the workshop. You will see that after, for example, there's a comma. However, the reporter did not interview the student. You can see a comma. In the meantime, comma, I am going to school. Therefore, comma, the student went to school. So after introductory words like however, therefore, thus, as a consequence, moreover, furthermore, after such words, there's usually a comma. Those are introductory words, but also phrases. For example, I'm going to give you quite a few, and usually this draws your attention that is a sentence that begins with as, as a result, comma, as I was going to school, comma. So as, most sentences that begin with as will indicate a comma after an introductory phrase. The other thing is with, W-I-T-H. Most sentences that begin with usually indicate an introductory sentence, which should be followed by a comma. Okay, then we have despite. Most sentences that start with despite will also need a comma after the introductory phrase. Despite me being ill, I still have to do my house chores. Despite me having good marks, I failed the exam. So you have that cause consequence. So despite, also since. Most sentences that begin with since, S-I-N-C-E, indicate an introductory sentence. Most sentences that begin with when will also indicate an introductory sentence. For example, when I arrive there, I will send you a postcard. When I arrive there, comma, I will send you a postcard. When the wind blows, comma, all the doors rattle. When I was young, comma, I was sick all the time. So we have when. We also have based on my results, comma, I qualify for a scholarship, right? Based on my health, I am unable to exercise for long hours. Based on my health, comma. So these are words that really, draw our attention to the fact that a comma is coming. We also have because. Most sentences that begin with because, most sentences that begin with the preposition, all indicate an introductory phase that should be followed by a comma. So those are just some, secrets in grammar that can really help you to understand where a comma needs to appear. That is the first example of a comma. The next one is using a comma for interrupting phrases, words, or clauses. Now, what does this mean? We use a comma when we want to add additional information that if taken out, the sentence will still make sense. So let's say I want to say something, but I need to add more information for that sentence to make sense. But if I don't add it, the sentence will still make sense. Let's look at the examples we have here. That student, John, was very helpful. Now, John is in between comma, and these two commas are what we call interrupting commas, because if we take out John of this sentence, the sentence will still make sense. So, for example, let's read this sentence without using John. That student was very helpful today. This sentence has a subject, a verb, or a predicate. So it makes sense on its own without John. So that student was very helpful today. Let's look at the next sentence. Mrs. Smith, the new sport teacher, showed us a new technique. The interrupting comma here or the additional words here is the new sport teacher. Why? Because if we take out that information, the sentence will still make sense grammatically. We're just adding it because we want to specifically know who Mrs. Smith is. But if we take out the information, the sentence is complete. It has a subject and a predicate. Mrs. Smith showed us a new technique. If I were to say, Mrs. Smith showed us a new technique, you will understand. The sentence makes sense, right? All right. That is for interrupting commas. Let's look at the other example, the last example here. John, who has just been made a student counselor, is presenting his speech at the assembly, right? So if we take out who has just been made a student counselor, we take it out. John is presenting his speech at the assembly. The sentence makes sense, isn't it? Okay. So that is how the interrupting comma works. Now, the third way in which you can use the comma is the comma to separate lists. When you use a comma in list, right? I'm sure this is common, where you're listing things, and to separate each item in a list, you use a right? Let's look at the example we have here. The reporter interviewed teachers, comma, parents, and members of the community. Now, there's instances where you can also use a comma. So if I were to use a comma before and it's correct. In English, you can also use the comma before an, or you may not use it. Both are correct, but be consistent. If you're going to use a comma before an, anytime you list, use a comma before an. If you won't do it, then don't do it from the start. What is important here is to be consistent. But why I prefer to use a comma is because there are certain lists that are too long. When the list is too long, it's clearer when you put a comma before and. Okay. All right. Any questions? There's a fourth way where you can also use a comma. You can also use a comma for adjectives. For example, the student moved slowly, quietly, and carefully towards the door of the exam room. So it's not just when you're listing items, but even when you're listing adverbs and adjectives, you can also use the comma. The student was a bright, cooperative team member. So in listing, it's not just listing items, but also listing adverbs and adjectives. You can also use a comma. So those are the instances that you can use a comma. Now, when I started, I said this is the most used punctuation, but also the punctuation with the most errors. And when you use the comma wrongfully, it is what we call the comma splice. So this means you put the comma when you were not supposed to put the comma. So you use the comma wrongfully. Now, let's look at the examples that we have here. Then we'll see how to fix it. There's 3 ways to fix a comma splice. So when you were not supposed to use a comma, you were either supposed to put a full stop and start the sentence. You were supposed to put a comma and use a coordinating conjunction, or you were supposed to put a semicolon. So there's 3 ways to fix a comma splice. Let's look at the example we have. We need to leave. We are going to be late. These are 2 independent sentences, and you cannot separate 2 independent sentences with a comma. An independent sentence is a sentence that makes sense on its own, right? When the sentence makes sense on its own, it's an independent sentence. And you cannot separate an independent sentence with a comma. You separate 2 independent sentences with number 1, a semicolon. Number 2, a comma and a coordinating conjunction. Number 3, you put a full stop and you start a new sentence. Okay? So I'm sure you're asking, what is a coordinative conjunction? So in English, we have, I think it's 5 or 6 coordinative conjunction. I'm going to put that for you now. Right? So you will see our coordinative conjunctions in English are and, but, for, or, nor, so, yet. It's not a lot of them. So each time there's a comma between two independent sentences, you can put a comma and any of these coordinative conjunctions that will work for that sentence. Let's look at the examples. We were out of milk. If it were to be a comma here, it would be a mistake. So if it were this, we are out of milk. I went to the store to buy some. This is a comma splice. So if I add so, the sentence becomes grammatically correct. The next example, I adore candy factories. If I were to take out an and say, I want to own some or own one someday, right? If I were to do that, that is a comma splice. But the moment I put a comma and add a coordinative conjunction and, the sentence becomes correct. Also, but and a comma, right? So one way of fixing your comma splice is to add a comma and a coordinative conjunction. The second way is to put a semicolon. We need to leave semicolon. We are going to be late. Why? Because semicolons, as we'll see, is the next punctuation, are used to separate two independent sentences. Now, if I say independent sentence, balanced sentence, or complete sentence, I'm referring to the same thing, right? A complete sentence is a balanced sentence, it's an independent sentence. So for two independent sentences, you can use a semicolon to separate them. The last thing you can do to fix a comma splice is to just put a full stop and start the new sentence afresh. Now, let's have you do this activity, then we can continue. So you will see an activity in front of you, and this is to look at the comma. So I want to see if you're able to understand the use of a comma. So I have not included the comma, and what I want you to do is to insert the comma where it's due in these sentences, and please paste it in the chat, and I'll have a look and I'll give feedback. Okay, so I'll start giving feedback the moment I see any activity in the chat. So we can just give 5 minutes for this activity, then we're going to move to the next punctuation. Don't worry, we're not going to do activities for all punctuations because it's a lot of them, but at least we'll do for the two main ones, which is semicolons and colons, and commas. If you book for one session, so sit with me, you need first. So let me just give 5 minutes for you to do this activity. So what you need to do is just to copy these examples, okay? And then insert the commas where it's due. And for the comma splice, you see here there's a comma splice. I want you to fix it using the 3 methods that we spoke about, either the semicolon, comma and a coordinative conjunction, or the full stop. So I want you to identify the comma splice and fix it, and then insert the comma where it is due. A lot of you have understood where to insert the commas and how to fix the sentences. So let's dive straight into the example. So you will see that with the first one, all those who inserted a comma after school were correct, and after however were also correct. So we need a comma here, right here where there's a comma in red, and we need another comma after however. As I walk to school, comma, I listen to music. However, comma, the music is not so loud that I can't hear a passing car. Then the second example, if I look at your examples, I like Moi's example, because what he did is he did what we call a run-on sentence, which I'll explain when we start looking at sentence structure. So basically, a run-on sentence is when you put two sentences together without the appropriate punctuation. Now, if you go to the chat and look at Moi's example, you will see that there is no punctuation between however. Even papa, right? There's no punctuation. So when you merge two sentences, independent sentences together without punctuation, then you are doing what we call a run-on sentence, right? And I'll explain further how to fix that. So you will see that yeah, right? So we need a comma right here. With the second example, Mary, comma, the student therapists believe her values adhere to those of the institution. The added information is the student therapist. Now, if you remove that information, then now read again. Mary believed her values adhere to those of the institution. So we've put two commas in between the information that is added. Let's look at the second one. John in his book states that education is key to success. Now, how do you fix this? What information that if I put commas in between, the sentence will still read? Now, if we put a comma here, after John and before that, and before book, right here, read the sentence. John states that education is key to success. The sentence still makes sense, right? So we need two commas here for the interrupting sentence or words. Then we've already arranged this, right? This is our list. So when it comes to the list, what I was trying to explain to you, or I was explaining while being muted, was that when you're listing, let me just do this so you can see. If I take out the comma before and, you will see that my PowerPoint will underline it as red. Check that out. I hope you can see that. It's red. Why? Because check at the bottom left, you will see my English is English United States. And mostly English United States wants you to put a comma before and. So for all those who shared in the chat and did not put a comma before and, you're still correct. Because it's grammatically correct in both the British and the American. However, if your word is on the United States, it requires you to put a comma before and. But the British need to put a comma before and. But both are usually accepted. Just be consistent. If you're going to put a comma before and, do so. If you're not going to do it, then don't do it. Don't switch between sometimes you put and other times you don't. Consistency is important here. All right. The last example is our comma splice. Now, let me see if someone worked on the comma splice. Excellent, Tato. Tato got it right. Thank you. Maringa also got it right. Masana, good attempt. However, we're supposed to put a full stop here. Okay. So this is a comma splice before however. So this is supposed to be a full stop and the comma will come after however. You know, we only learn by making mistakes. You cannot learn if you don't make mistakes. That's the only way we learn. Can someone try to fix the comma splice for the last sentence? This is really important. So what I have done is I've inserted the commas wrongfully. So what I need you to do is to fix that. So instead of the commas that you see, so the sentence is all other punctuations are fine, but the commas, I want you to look at the commas. Which comma in that last sentence is wrongfully placed and how do you fix it? So the last example here, there's commas there that are wrongfully placed. How should we fix it? Now, if we go back, we remember that to fix a comma splice, we can fix it with a full stop and start a new sentence. We can fix it with a semicolon or with a comma and a coordinative conjunction, but so far yet. And the comma splice is when we place the comma wrongfully between two independent sentences. Because an independent sentence should not be separated with a comma. So when you read, try to find where the sentence is independent, where it makes sense on its own. And then from there, if you see a comma, then that is a mistake. Excellent, Hilda. Excellent. The first sentence is correct. The clouds were dark, full stop. We thought it would rain. Excellent. So what Hilda has done is she has fixed the comma splice by putting a full stop and starting again from the scratch. With the second sentence, I bought a coat. However, so before however, what we'll do there is we'll put a semicolon, because usually when there is a linking word like however, therefore, we usually separate it with either a full stop or a semicolon. Why? It did not fit. As much as it is short, it is a complete sentence, Hilda, because if you see it is the subject, did not is the verb, fit is the object. That sentence is full. If I say, Hilda, it did not fit, it makes sense, especially if before I had said I was trying this stop, full stop, it did not fit, right? It there is now the pronoun referring to the top, which makes sense because it's the subject. It did not fit, right? So the semicolon will be best here because unlike the full stop, because then it's referring to the quote in the previous sentence. And we best use semicolon when we want to merge two sentences that are strong. When we bring them together, they make more sense together than separated. Then we use, but this makes sense on their own. Then it's best to use the semicolon than to use the full stop, right? So Hilda, how do we fix this? So we will put a semicolon right here, okay? So here will be, we'll fix this comma splice by putting a semicolon. And we can put a full stop here. Start a new sentence as Hilda just did. That is correct. But we can also fix it this way. The first sentence could also be fixed in this way. Since I cannot use the chat, I'm just going to add it on my slide. We could also fix it in this way. Put a semicolon there and say we. All right, that will be correct. We can also fix it this way. We put a comma and coordinative conjunction, right? And that will also be correct. The clouds were dark and sorry, it's because I deleted we, that's why the sentence is not working. There we go. And we thought it will rain. So you see that we have fixed the comma splice in three ways. Hilda put the full stop and started the sentence, which is correct. We also put a semicolon, which is correct. We also put a comma and a coordinative conjunction, which is correct. So this is how we fix the comma splices in these examples. Any questions before we move to our next punctuation? Any questions regarding the comma? And thank you so much for all those who participated. Excellent. Thank you. Pleasure. Thank you, Tato, Maringa, Masana, everyone. I may not call your name, but I'm seeing all those who have participated and even those who are still just listening. It's really important. Just being willing to learn is, the first step. So thank you, everyone. Excellent. All right. Okay. If we don't have any questions, let's move on to our next punctuation, the semicolon. Now, the semicolon is this one. Let me put it on my slide. Okay, this is the semicolon. Now, do not get confused between the semicolon and the colon. The colon is this one. That is the colon, the one in parentheses. That's the colon. Okay, I'm sure you're asking yourself, the parenthesis is this round brackets. Now, with the American English, they call these brackets. With the British, they say parentheses. Okay, so the round brackets, our parentheses. So what I have put there inside, that is the colon. So I don't want you to get confused between the colon and the semicolon. Okay, the colon is the two dots. The semicolon is the one with the one dot and a comma under. That is what we call the semicolon. So sometimes students make the mistake to interchange both. The student will use the colon, especially the semicolon. I find a lot of students using the semicolon on the place of a colon when they want to introduce a list. So please do not confuse these two. So the semicolon is this one. So the semicolon, as we have seen when we're looking at the comma splice, is used to connect two balanced sentences. That is the first use of the semicolon. And we've been looking at some examples already above in the activity. So when you want to connect two sentences that make sense, but together they are strong, you use your semicolon. For example, John was unhappy with his results. He knew he did not prepare enough. Now, when you use a semicolon, the question you should ask yourself to know if you've used it correctly is this. If I were to take out this semicolon and insert a full stop, if you can do that, each time you can use a full stop, it means you can. If you cannot use a full stop, then a semicolon cannot work. But why do I use a semicolon? When I want to show the strong link between two ideas. That is the purpose of a semicolon. So another thing before I proceed that will really help you with punctuation, you need to know that there's, in many instances, more than one punctuation can work. Once I know that, the decision to choose a specific punctuation depends on the situation or the message that I'm trying to get across. Now, I just said to fix a comma splice, you can fix it in 3 different ways, right? Why? Because it depends on the message you want to send across. If I want to show the strong link between two ideas, I will use my semicolon. If the sentence is too long and the link is not that important, then I'll put a full stop and start the sentence from afresh. If I want to again show the strong link, I can use a comma and a coordinating conjunction. So the semicolon, as you can see in the examples, to show the strong link. John was unhappy with his result. He knew he didn't prepare enough. So it's because he didn't prepare enough that he was unhappy with his results. The student was relevant and the study was relevant and raised some interesting points. It was definitely thought-provoking. These are 2 sentences that are complete, but to show the strong link between the two, the writer decided to use a semicolon, but a full stop will equally work. You can also use a semicolon before a coordinating conjunction, like however, therefore, thus, right? So if you have 2 sentences that are independent, make sense on their own, but they are connected by if they are connected by a connecting word, right? Your linking device is like therefore, however, furthermore, these are what we call linking words. So you're using a linking word to connect the 2 sentences. Then it's important that you use a semicolon. The research was generally informative. However, so our linking word is however, isn't it? That is our linking word, however. So we put a semicolon before and a comma after, right? First, we address the issues that had already been listed. Then we move on to new ideas. First, there is a linking word. That means we use an introductory comma after first. Then we use the semicolon to introduce the new independent sentence. But because there's a coordinative conjunction, a linking word then we need a comma right here. So it's the same as the one above. The only difference between these two, the first and the second, between a comma for balanced sentences, a semicolon for balanced sentences and a semicolon for connecting word, the only difference is that the first and the second one has a linking word. That's the only difference. So if we were to take out the linking word, just leave a semicolon, the sentence will still make sense. Let's take out the linking word. So if I were to say, leave it like this, the research was generally informative, a key idea was missing. Still makes sense, grammatically correct. But I'm putting a link so that the linking word will provide that cohesion between the 2 ideas, right? Let me put back my linking word. Okay. Then the last instance that you use the semicolon is also to separate lists. Yes, guys. Remember I told you earlier that you will use this, you can use different punctuations interchangeably. So you can use the comma to list, but you can also use the semicolon to list. Now, the mistake that students usually make when listing using the semicolon is they will use a semicolon to list items. Only use the semicolon to list long ideas. So if it's not long, use your comma. If it's anything short, just go for the comma. Mostly use the semicolon when you're listing ideas, if possible, that makes sense on their own. When I woke up in the morning, I did the following. I went to brush my teeth. Then I, opened the windows. Then I took a shower. Then I had breakfast. Now, if you were to look at these different items, you will see that I brushed my teeth is a full sentence. It's independent. It makes sense. I had breakfast. It makes sense on its own. I opened the windows. It makes sense on its own. I'm listing ideas that can stand on their own. So in such an instance, then I will use a semicolon. Teboko, so what will happen? Can I have the link of the workshop? I don't know if someone is struggling to access the workshop. Maybe Mr. Kagiso can help because I cannot access the chat still. Mr. Kagiso, if you're here, please just see if you can help Teboko to send her the link for the workshop. I think it's one of those instances where she can see the chat, but she's unable to log in. Okay, let's go back to the presentation. All right, just switching between the windows to make sure if you're asking any questions so that I can also, answer your questions. Okay, so you'll see the example we have here. For example, I read a research paper on snakes in Australia, one about Queensland crocodiles, semicolon, one that I really didn't understand, semicolon, and the one about conservation of reptiles. Now, when I was talking about comma listing, I told you do not have to put a comma before and. But it's preferable when you're listing using a semicolon. It's always preferable to put the semicolon before you list the last item before and. It's preferable. All right. Now, your last activity for the day, then you get to hear my voice till the session ends. Okay. So I have again put some sentences for you to do based on these three. A comma to separate balanced sentences, a semicolon to separate balanced sentences, a semicolon before connecting words or linking words, a colon when listing items in a list, right? So these three instances, I have put examples here for you. So what I need you to do is to fix these sentences for me. So I'm going to give you 5 minutes to do the activity. So you have 4 sentences. What I need you to do is to insert the semicolon where it is needed and just post that in the chat. So insert the semicolon where it is needed. Okay, now let's have some feedback. All right, so we have the first one. I need a quiet place to sit and think. I need fresh air to clear my mind. Excellent, Maurice, that's correct. Teboko, that's also correct. Let's look at Shililo. I went to a German school. However, I am unable to speak German fluently. Excellent, that is also correct. Tapelo, that is correct. Moise, the second example, you said he further talked with his group and he ensured the teacher got homework. Now, the only wrong thing there, it's the he with capital letter. Now, note, guys, a capital letter should never follow a semicolon unless it's a proper noun. Proper nouns are names of places, things, and people. So if it's a proper noun, then it can follow a semicolon. Alternatively, a capital letter should never follow a semicolon. And that is why when you engage or when you practice in these workshops, you're able to also understand other examples, because as I said, it's only by making mistakes that you're able to learn. Excellent, guys. Shililo, that's correct. Okay. Pleasure, that's correct, but we need a comma after however, because however here is a linking word. And when we're looking at linking at commas, we said after every linking word, you need a comma. So there needs to be a comma after however. Excellent. Vuyango, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Muvango, Muvango. Okay, excellent. Then never forget the full stop at the end of your sentence. So in trying to fix punctuation mistake, always make sure you don't add any other, right? So at the end of all your sentences, always put a full stop. Excellent. So I'm going to fix this in my slide so you can see for all those who participated. Thank you so much. For those who have been observing and learning, again, thank you. A comma here before the coordinative conjunction and a complete or balanced sentence and a semicolon there. I hope you were able to see, where let me put that in red so you can all see where we made the corrections, all right? Excellent, guys, well done. I'm so happy that you're able to understand how to punctuate. Thank you so much, everyone, for participating and engaging. Now, after this activity, I'm going to talk for the next 40 minutes to walk you through the other punctuation rules. But I will be providing examples in between. And if you have any questions, please feel free to stop me at any time. When I get to the language, I'm going to give at least a 5 minutes break for you to maybe stretch, get coffee, and then the few minutes left, we are going to proceed with language. And you do not need to leave the session just to stretch. So the colon, remember I said, is different from the semicolon, right? So the colon is this one, the one with 2 dots. So the colon is used to introduce further information. For example, the instruction said, colon, connect part A to part B. Please bring the following items to class, colon, your homework, diary, comma, a notebook, your pencil case, and your textbook. So you see, when you want to introduce a list of items, you can use a colon. So what does this mean? You will never use a colon in between 2 balanced sentences. That is the semicolon. The colon is usually used when you see a colon. Most often, either the sentence before the colon cannot stand on its own, or the sentence after cannot stand on its own. Now, if you look at the list, if I were to take out the sentence before and say your homework diary, a notebook, your pencil case, and your textbook, you'll be like, Queen, what does that mean? What are you saying? Just imagine someone stands in front of you and they're like, Audrey, your homework, your notebook, your pencil, and you're like, okay, what's going on, right? So it's like that. The colon usually introduces an unbalanced sentence or is followed by an unbalanced sentence. So the sentence has to be together for it to make sense. So it mostly introduces the list. Now, the mistakes students sometimes make is to use a colon after words like such as, including, for example, when they introduce items that after an independent sentence. So if my sentence is independent, generally you don't need a colon. I went to school and I brought certain books, such as a notebook, a pencil, and a textbook. A colon is not needed there because my sentence is independent already. It makes sense on its own. And such as in that example serves as the colon. But if the sentence before does not make sense fully on its own, bring the following items to class. That sentence does not make sense on its own. Then you need a colon because we don't know what is following. So if you were to say, bring the items including your homework, your textbook, your notebook to class, then you will need a colon because after such as. But what I'm saying is usually After phrases like such as, including, you don't need a colon because such words already indicate a list, and a colon indicates a list. So if you use including and you use a colon, then you're repeating yourself using the punctuation. But if the list is to come in point forms like this, you know, when you list down, like number 1, number 2, number 3, when your list comes down, then you can use a colon regardless. The list is not part of the sentence. Then even after including, you can use a colon. After such as, you can use a colon, but avoid in sentences to use a colon after such as or including. Right. The next punctuation, please, if you have any questions at this point, because there will be no longer activities, please feel free to stop me at any time. When it comes to the colon, one thing I want you to pay attention to is the use of capitalization after the colon. Now, when do I capitalize after a colon? When the sentence after the colon it's a full sentence. You see here, this is a quote, so you can put a capital letter. You see here, it's a small letter, not a capital letter, your homework. Why? Because it's not a sentence on its own. But sometimes you have to introduce a sentence on its own, a quote or something. Then you can use a capital letter. If it's a proper noun, you can use a capital letter. When it introduces the complete, they use a capital letter. But if it merges two sentences together that are not independent, then do not use a capital letter. Okay? All right. The apostrophe. The apostrophe shows ownership. Is to say when you want to show that something belongs to you or to someone, then you use the apostrophe. Okay, let me just on the slide next to the apostrophe. I'm sure I hope you can see this. Okay, because there's a word before, let's do this. There we go. The apostrophe is that one that comes on the opposite side just after the word, right? So this is used to show ownership, that something belongs to you. So for example, I would say Moise's book, right? Kotibe's textbook, Audrey's computer, right? So I'm saying it belongs to Audrey. It belongs to Prince. It belongs to Teboko, right? So I'm saying it belongs to Chumile. Then I use an apostrophe. Now, what is the catch when it comes to the apostrophe? What I want you to pay attention to is that apostrophes, when the word is plural, the apostrophe comes after the S. Okay, this is where I like to use the chat, but I'm going to use my slide here. Let me use another slide so that it's clear. You can see clearly, right? So now let's assume that we're talking about one person. So we'll say Audrey's book, okay, with an S, apostrophe S. Now, if I'm talking about Louis' book, can anyone tell me the difference between these two? Are you noticing anything here? Can anyone notice anything on this slide? Audrey's book, John's book, Louis' book, and teacher's book. Can anyone notice the difference here?
Yes, ma'am, we can notice the difference. In Audrey's book, is that the comma comes before, the apostrophe comes before S, and in teacher's book, the apostrophe comes after an S.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you so much. That is it, right? So what you need to know with the apostrophe is that when we are talking about plurality, so if you're talking about many people, like teachers, you don't need to put another. The mistake some students make is they'll put an S here again. That is wrong. So if the word is plural already, all you need to do is add the apostrophe. If the word or the name has an S, you write Louise with an S already, then you just add the apostrophe. You do not need to add another S. So that is the catch when it comes to the apostrophe or the mistake not to make. Sometimes students, the second thing to note is using the apostrophe when it's not needed. Sometimes students want to talk about plurality, many, they use the apostrophe without knowing. If I'm saying the competitors were happy after they won the game, yeah, I mean many competitors, but what some students will do is the apostrophe here. They get confused between ownership and plurality. So please pay attention when you want to talk about the competitor's strategy. Now you're saying the strategies belong to the competitors, then there will be an apostrophe. If it's one competitor, the apostrophe comes before the S. If it's many, it comes after the S, just like that. That is the catch with the apostrophe. All right. Any questions, remember to stop me. Then after the comma, the next most popular punctuation is the full stop. We all know that after the sentence is complete, we need to put the full stop. But because it's just a common and easy punctuation, we tend to forget. Most students make this mistake with the full stop due to forgetting or negligence, not that they do not know, right? So please just always make sure when your sentence ends or at the end of a complete thought, please always ensure that you put a full stop to indicate that the sentence has ended. Okay. And remember, any place where you use the semicolon, it means the full stop will also work. If you use a coordinative conjunction and a comma, it means the full stop will also work. Okay. Question mark. We know when if I ask the question, it means there needs to be a question mark, right? So what is the catch? Why would there be a mistake? I mean, it's a question, right? Tepiso, are you going to school today? That is a question mark, right? Chumile, what did you eat today? It's a question mark. Okay, now what is the catch there? The problem is sometimes we use the question mark when we are not asking a question. For example, the question was whether I should go to school or not. Some students will put a question there. The question was whether I should go to school or not. You are thinking about the question, but you're not asking a question. The question would be, should I go to school? Question mark, that is the question. But if you say the question is whether I should go to school or not, that is a statement. So being able to recognize an actual question and a statement about a question, that is where students usually get confused, okay? The exclamation mark. Now, this is the reason I put this here is because I need to draw your attention to avoid this as much as possible. In academic writing, it's good to avoid the exclamation mark, except it is inside a quote. So you're using a direct quote that you got from an article, a book, or online, an academic source you're quoting, and in that quote, it's a direct quote, so word for word, verbatim. So tomorrow we're going to do referencing and plagiarism. So we're going to look at how to reference, how to summarize, how to do direct quotes. We're going to look at referencing, how to reference, and we'll see that one way is to use direct quotes. So you take the word verbatim, so word for word, and you include it in your work. If there was an exclamation mark, of course, verbatim means you do not change anything. Paraphrasing means you put it in your own words and reference. Direct quote means you take it word for word, punctuation for punctuation, and then you reference, okay? That is when you use the exclamation mark. But when writing, except it's a short story, you were asked to write a short story, definitely you will use emotions. The exclamation mark is used to express emotions. And what we don't want in most academic work is to include emotions. We want you to be objective, to use facts, right? So emotions most often are not included. So this is one punctuation. This is a punctuation mark you should see sparingly in your academic work. Okay? Ellipsis. This is another one you should see sparingly, except it is within a quote. Now, ellipsis could be used in the space of etc. and so on and so more. And, yes, so to indicate more is coming. Avoid that. When you are listing and you come to the end of your list, it's better you use and or. Now, when I say I'll be bringing the following items, a book, a textbook, and or a ruler. I said such as. Once you say such as, I'll be bringing things like, I'll be bringing items like, I'll be bringing items such as, like, including, means examples of. It means the list is inexhaustible. I'm just naming a few. So there's no need to come at the end and say etc. again. And when we look at the language, we'll see that etc. is something you should avoid, this thing, etc. It's not formal. Okay, so avoid ellipses except you are using it in quote. So how do you use it? You take a direct quote and you want to include it, but the quote is too long. What you're interested in is the first two sentences and the last two sentences. And the 5 sentences in between, you're not interested in. So what you do is you use your ellipses, these 3 dots, to indicate to the reader that there's more information in between. If they want, they can go check it out. But what you want them to look at, or you want their attention to, is the first sentence and the last sentence. And if the sentence ends somewhere, it's too long and you're short of word counts, you can take it off. But any information you take off from a direct quote, you can use ellipses to show the reader that there's some information that is missing in there. The next punctuation that you should pay attention to is the hyphen and the em dashes. Okay? So usually students get confused between the short one, which is the hyphen used for common nouns, and the em dashes. So both the m and the n can be used interchangeably to indicate, for example, number 1, you can use the em dashes in the place of comma, in the place of parentheses. So if you want to add, like we look at the interrupting comma. So if you want to add additional information, if you feel like I don't want to use the comma, there's too many commas, you can use your en dash. If you want to add more information or a list and you don't want to use the colon, you can use the en dash. So as I told you earlier, many punctuations can go for the same thing. You just decide which one you want to use. Avoid em dashes. They are more intrusive. It's preferable to use the colon, than the em dash. But it's also preferable to use the em dash than the parentheses. Parentheses is really information that it's not that important, truly. But if the information is somehow important, it's better to use the em dash than to use the parentheses, because both can be used interchangeably. All right? So prepositions is another part of our grammar. I'm not going to go through it because there's about 150 prepositions in English. And even I'm still learning about these prepositions. So what I can tell you about preposition is they are mostly adverbial. So you need to just get used to it. Keep reading and reading and reading, and the more you read, you will see and understand. For example, right? At length, lack of, knowledge of. So these are words that come together. In conclusion, you will not say for conclusion. You always say in conclusion, right? You always say delay in, not delay on, right? You say as regards. You say preference for, not preference to, for example. You can say prelude to. So these are words that together they make sense, and if you change it, it could still be correct, but it could mean something else. So I have provided a list of prepositions for you to go through and learn. So when you get the presentation, you can always go through them, or you just go online and ask for prepositions in English and get the list and just practice it. The next thing is capitalization, right? There are many capital letters, but what is important is to note that you only capitalize proper nouns. You capitalize the beginning of sentences, and you always capitalize the pronoun I. right? So organizations are names of things, so you capitalize them. Audrey is someone's name, so you capitalize it, right? Titles are usually not capitalized, except they are in front of a name. The doctor was present at his clinic. The doctor there, I'm not going to capitalize it because I'm referring to the general common noun doctor. But if I were to say Dr. Smith was at the clinic, they capitalize doctor. If I were to say the president of America is Joe Biden, right? I will not capitalize it. But if I were to say President Joe Biden is the president of America, then President Joe Biden, the first president there appearing in front of the name, I'll capitalize it. Do not capitalize name of diseases except there is a name in front. For example, Alzheimer's. That is a disease named after someone, so it will be capitalized, but you will not capitalize arthritis. COVID is capitalized because it's the short form of coronavirus, right? So mostly theories, approaches are not capitalized. So it's really getting to know what is capitalized and what is not capitalized. Articles, there are 3 articles in English, a and an. The is in front of definite articles, so referring to something you know about, right? A and an is for something you're mentioning for the first time or do not know about. If a car passes in front of the house, or be like a red car just passed by. Why? Because I do not know the car. It's the first time the car is passing. But if the car were to pass back, then I'll be like, hey, the red car passed again. Now I'm using the definite article the, because now I know which car I'm referring to. Sentence structure is the last part of our grammar.
On the articles, you were talking very fast. I couldn't hear you properly, ma'am. Can you please repeat that?
So what I was saying about articles, we have 3 articles in English. It's the, it's the, it's a, and it's an. So the, the, is the definite article because it refers to a specific something that you're usually aware of. A and an usually refer to things that you're not aware when you're saying something for the first time or the reader does not know what you're referring to. So your definite articles usually describe the noun before it, right? So if the noun before it is something that you know about, then you use the. If it's something you do not know about or hearing it for the first time, you use a. So the example I gave was, let's assume you're sitting in front of your veranda and a car is passing by. Even I just said a car. Why? Because it's the first time I'm mentioning the car. So I will tell my friend, hey, Audrey, a red car just passed by. A red car. And A, because it's standing in front of a consonant. Car is a consonant, right? But if it was an orange, I'll say an orange just passed by, hypothetically. Of course, oranges don't work, right? Now, if the car is coming back, I already said a car. Audrey has already seen the car. We know this car. Then I will say, hey, Audrey, the red car just passed again. Why? Now I'm using the definite article the because we now know which car we're referring to. Does that make sense? Do you understand? Yes. So when you're writing your essay and you're referring to something for the first time, you usually use the indefinite article a or and. But if you've mentioned it before, then you can use the definite article, the indefinite article the. Sentence structure. We've looked at the punctuation marks that students struggle with the most. So what I'm saying is I haven't exhausted all the punctuations in English. It's going to take us even 3 hours. We're not going to be able to exhaust all the punctuation, right? There's a lot of them. What I focused on was the ones that we see a lot in your essays, in your academic work. So we can focus on those. If you have any other questions regarding any other punctuation, please book for a one-on-one consultation, and I'm more than willing to walk you through them, okay? The next thing, after you've looked at your punctuation, preposition, capitalization, article, look at your sentence structures. Now, a full sentence is a sentence that is complete. It has a subject and a predicate. So it has a subject, a verb, and expresses a full thought. Now, if we were to say writing the first draft of an essay, the question would be, Chumile is going to ask me, what? Writing the first draft of an essay, that it's incomplete. What about it, right? And that is what we call incomplete sentences, right? When the sentence on its own does not make sense. So a complete sentence must make sense. So how do we fix sentence fragments? We need to make sure the thought is complete. So how will we fix that sentence? Writing the first draft of an essay is incomplete. So how will I fix it? Writing the first draft of an essay is an important step. Now, that is a complete thought. The tutor is discussing the concepts of writing the first draft of an essay. Now, that is a full thought. So you need to make sure when you put a full stop, you need to make sure, does this sentence express the full sense? Does it make sense? So the most mistake in terms of sentence structures are incomplete sentences. Then the second mistake is what we call run-on sentences. When the student, writes a sentence and merges two independent sentences without the appropriate punctuation mark. Now, look at the examples we have here. The research was conducted by an in-depth survey. The results were interpreted by the team. Ooh, just reading that, I feel like I need a breather. Why? Because the punctuation is missing. So how do we correct that? Firstly, we correct it the same way we correct the comma splice. You can put a full stop and start the sentence. You can put a comma and a coordinative conjunction, or you can put a semicolon. So the same way you fix a comma splice, the same way you can fix the run-on sentence. Now, let's see. The research was conducted by an in-depth survey. The results were interpreted by the team. You see the semicolon, right? You can put a coordinative conjunction. This research was conducted by an in-depth survey and the results were interpreted by the team. Or you could put a full stop and start the sentence again. So when it comes to sentence structure, is these two things. Avoid run-on sentences and avoid incomplete sentences. So your sentences must be complete. That is it in terms of sentence structure. The next thing in terms of grammar is the subject-verb agreement. If I were to say, Queen goes to school. Queen and Audrey go to school. So when it's plural, the verb is, when it's two subjects, the verb is singular. But if it's one subject, the verb is plural. So I go to school. We go to school. Sorry, that's not relevant. So I would say Queen and Audrey go to school, but Audrey goes to school. And I'm sure Audrey now is thinking, oh, this one is speaking on me. Sorry. All right, so Moise can say Moise and Papa go to school, right? But Kotibe goes to school. Kotibe eats rice before lunchtime. Tesipo walks to school every day. Reply and Tesipo walk to school. Now, where do students mostly make a mistake? And that is where you usually pay attention when I say students usually make this mistake. When students cite and they're citing using a or, you can see here, most often they use the wrong verb. So each time you use an or, this is a plural noun. So the verb that follows should be singular. So you will say Mary and all suggest, not Mary and all suggest. So that is what you need to pay attention to when it comes to subject-verb agreement, okay? So when you get the slide, you can also look at this. You know, everybody, everyone, every student, each student, nobody, somebody, someone, the team group, the family will take your singular verb. So you will not say the family have, you will say the family has, because the family is regarded as one subject, right? Each of the student is one subject. Every student is one subject. Everyone is one subject. So everyone has, right? Everybody has, not have. Then the plural one, both the students do. Several students have. A few of the students need, not needs. Many students are. or have. Okay? Uncountable nouns also take singular. English is. The information is. Not the information are. The news, although it has an S, is uncountable. So the news is very exciting. Okay? Of course, the next thing is you need to pay attention to your spelling. When we look at grammar, we also look at spelling, right? So when we talk about spelling, you need to pay attention to your words that look the same or sound the same, but are spelled differently. Usually these words you can get very easily confused with your homonyms. Okay, so words that sound the same but are spelled differently. So there, and there are three different words and mean three different things. So do not confuse them. There is mostly referred to the adverb meaning it. We are going there tonight. There, on the other hand, is a possessive noun when referring to something that belongs to you, right? I love going to Reds for brunch. Their toast is there. The last one is the contracted form of they are. And we will see when we look at language that we should avoid contractions. So rather write them in full. The next thing, very important, and I'm not going to rush over this, is which and that. Now, students usually get confused with which and that. And after this workshop, I'm thinking with the activity, we can separate maybe language and grammar and have two different workshops and deal with the language and deal with the grammar on a different day. Okay, so when it comes to which and that, these words are quite tricky and should be used differently. Now, let's look at this example. Our office, which has two entrances, is located in Sydney. Here, the clause which has two entrances simply refers to additional information that can be removed without changing the meaning, which focuses on the location of the office itself. On the other hand, if I were to use that, the office that has two entrances is located in Sydney has a different meaning. The sentence suggests that there are multiple offices, but the office with two entrances is the one located in Sydney. So you need to be careful when you use that and which. Mostly use that when you know you're adding information that is into the sentence. Use which when you're adding additional information that when taken out, the sentence will still make sense. This will help you to avoid the confusion. So if I am done my sentence and I want to add more, I put a comma and which to add more information. Let me show you an example. I'll just type out an example on another slide. This is really important because students make a lot of mistake with this. So you will see, look at this example. For example, Rob tripped over his shoes. That sentence is complete. Now, for me to add more information about the sentence, I've added a comma and which he had left lying in the middle of the floor. You see that this is additional information to explain why Rob tripped over his shoes. But if I take out this information, the sentence still makes sense. Rob tripped over his shoes. Everyone loved Robin's video. That sentence makes sense on its own. Now I want to add additional information, comma and which he had filmed in the garage, right? So what you want to note, the difference is that usually introduces important information that cannot be taken out, but which usually adds more information and should be preceded by a comma. Okay, then there's who and whom. The big thing here to remember when to use whom and when to use who is if you can replace if you can replace who with he. So if you can put he in the sentence and it makes sense, then use who. If you can put him and it's still grammatically correct, then use whom. So whenever you have the sentence and you can replace with him, then use whom. If you can replace with he, then use who. That will help you to know when to use what. Okay, we have come to the end of grammar. We do not have enough time to go through academic language, but I'll definitely touch on a few things that are important when we look at the language. Now, when it comes to language, remember I said there's two things we look at, or three things. Is it formal? Is it clear? Is it simple? So there's this conception, because I'm writing an academics, I want to use big words. I want to make it complex. Keep your language simple. Simple is best. Keep it simple. Straight to the point. You want your readers to really understand what you're talking about. You want them to get you clearly. Communication, the first goal of communication is for your readers to understand you. So keep it simple. For each abbreviation, make sure you explain it the first time. For contractions, avoid them. Things like didn't, shouldn't, doesn't. Rather write it in full. Does not, should not, did not. Acronyms, your WHO, your APA. Each time you use an acronym, introduce it the first time, right? Avoid cliches, like think out of the box. At the end of the day, going forward, such words are cliches. You can say them when you are speaking, but avoid such words when you are writing. In terms of language, what else do we look at? Unless sometimes just try to keep it simple. Something you can say it with less word, say it with less word. So try to eliminate words that are not necessary, and that can make you sound emotional. So let's look at the example here. The investment had some costly results. It's much more concise than the investment had some bad results that cost the firm a lot of money. That cost the firm a lot of money. You're sounding emotional and it's not needed. So you simply say the investment had some costly. Costly already explains the fact that the firm lost a lot of money. So if you can say something briefly, it's better you say it briefly than to say it in many words. Okay, so keep your language straight, concise, and simple. Okay. The other thing you want to do in your language is to use formal words. Instead of saying give, you can use provided. Okay. It's simple, but it's more academically sound. All right. Try to avoid choppy sentences also. Now, when you have 5 short sentences, we went to school, we ate rice, we went to the sports field, we then ate more rice. So having so many short sentences is called choppy sentences. What are we saying here? Yes, keep it short, but vary your sentences. Have a coordinative conjunction and a comma to make it a complex sentence. Use your semicolon to merge 2 independent sentences. Use your colon. Try to have complex compound sentences, not just simple sentences standing next to each other. That is what we call a choppy language. So you want to avoid that as well. Okay. Then you want to also ensure that there is parallelism in your work. So what does this mean? There needs to be balanced, equal parts in your sentence. Let's give an example. The managing director conducted the meeting fairly and with effectiveness. Fairly is an adverb. Effectiveness is a noun. So you want to list with adverbs. So what will you say? The managing director conducted the meeting fairly and effectively. Fairly is a verb, an adverb, and effectively is also an adverb. So you want to list with the same word form. Also avoid the passive verb form. So instead to say the student went to school as mentioned by Moise, or by reply, you want to say reply mentioned that. So you use the passive, the active voice. Okay. All right. So what next? Also your reporting verbs. When you are referencing and you're using your reporting verbs, right? Like the author argued that, the author pointed out that, the author said that, you want to vary them, not use the same. Therefore, therefore, therefore. Use therefore as a result, thus, as a consequence. Then when you're using your reporting verbs also, use them in the same tense. If you said Mary and all mentioned that. Then you go to the next one and you say Chumile argues that. Now you're moving from the past tense to the present tense. If you're to report in the present tense, continue in the present tense. If you're to report in the past tense, continue in the past tense. Then the student voice is the next thing in the language you should pay attention to. What is student voice? Try to make sure that your work is not only, and we'll address this more tomorrow when we look at referencing. When you reference, try to make your first sentence, write it in your own words, then the last sentence in your own words. We want to also see you explaining in your own words. It shouldn't just be one reference after the other. If there's no student voice, then you will lack in both referencing and language. Keep your register formal. So avoid words like varsity, say university. Avoid contractions. Try to keep your tone formal. If the way you speak to your friend, avoid that. The way you write is different. Okay? And when you write in your essay, which we'll also look at when we do the academic essay next week, and you're writing your thesis, avoid things like in this essay I will be. Rather say this essay addresses, right? This essay discusses. When you say in this essay, or in this report, I will be. Rather, you say straight, this report addresses, or this report discusses. So this, again, will highlight your language and make it as formal as possible. As I have said, when it comes to the language, it's keeping it formal, simple, and clear. Then you've achieved your academic language. Avoiding contractions, introducing acronyms and abbreviations. And when it comes to grammar, it's making sure you stick to the British English, making sure that your punctuation is correct, your sentences are complete, and there's no run-on sentences, looking at your prepositions, your article capitalization, right? And then you'll be able to have a work with less grammatical and language mistake. And I'm saying less because I say language, grammar is a process. It's not about let me cram all the rules. The more you write, the more you make mistakes, the more you understand how to avoid this mistake. So I encourage you to keep writing, keep making mistakes, and having Queen to check your work to identify these mistakes so that you're able to identify them yourself. So thank you so much, everyone. So I have just summarized what we've done, which is the grammar and the language. We've done some activities. We've looked at what is important or the common mistakes that students usually make. Remember, if you want to book for a one-on-one consultation, you can do so by emailing Mr. Kagiso. So if you want a copy of the presentation, please email me. Just introduce yourself, say, you attended the grammar workshop and you would like a presentation, a copy of the presentation, and I'll send it to you. If you want to book for a one-on-one consultation, please email Mr. Kagiso. He will tell you about my availabilities and he will look at your availability. So just contact him, tell him when you're available, or he will communicate with you and we'll make arrangements for us to meet one-on-one for 30 minutes to go through your work.
So you said if we want the presentation, we must email you using our UNITA email or personal emails to send you that.
No, any is fine. Any email is fine. Just introduce yourself with the name that you use to sign in today's workshop. So if in today's workshop you use Muvango, sorry, just say this is Muvango. I attended a grammar workshop, an hour ago, or if it's tomorrow, yesterday. May I please have the grammar and language presentation? So thank you so much, everyone, as we have come to the end of today's session. Thank you, Mr. Kagiso, for assisting. And if there's no other questions, please have a lovely evening.